meeting of the Village of Lake Bluff Village Board of Trustees. Clerk, please call the roll.
Trustee Cole,
Here.
Trustee Fisher,
Here.
Trustee Freed,
Here.
Trustee Rappin,
Here.
Trustee Ryder.
Here.
Thank you. Next on our agenda are the non-agenda items and visitor for public comments. The Committee of the Whole allocates 15 minutes during this item for those individuals who would like the opportunity to address the Committee of the Whole on any matter not listed on this agenda. Each person addressing the Committee of the Whole is asked to limit their comments to a maximum of 3 minutes. And I do not see anybody willing to address us here. Do we have anybody online?
There's a handful of participants on the Zoom call. If anybody wants to be heard now under this item of non-agenda items, please raise your hand. You'll be recognized. No one raise your hand.
All right. Moving on to the next item, that would be our general business, and that would be the Committee of the Whole will entertain requests from anyone present to modify the order of business to be conducted. Should we proceed logically because everything is important? So first, we'll consider the minutes to get them all out of the way. Could I please have a motion for the minutes?
Just to clarify, I had a conversation with Trustee Ryder earlier today. She identified there was a typo on page 2 and the fifth full paragraph. There was the word "we," W-E was missing. And it's a simple miss, so non-substantive.
Okay. Any more comments from trustees on this item? This is a voice vote.
You need a motion as amended?
Oh, as amended.
So moved as amended.
Second.
Thank you. This is a voice vote. All in favor?
Aye.
Anyone opposed? Thank you. The motion carries. Next on our agenda is the discussion regarding establishing regulations for charter buses and unscheduled stops.
Want me to take it?
Yes.
So in the packet, there was an extensive memo provided by legal counsel describing the various regulations that municipalities in the Chicagoland area was putting in place to address these charter buses showing up unscheduled stops, mostly at metro stations. So there's a variety of measures we put together for your consideration tonight now to have a conversation, then again later in the regular board agenda to actually adopt some potential regulations. And again, these are really to set out procedures, advanced planning, details, notice that we can use to ensure that should we have, and we haven't yet had any unchartered buses show up at our metro station or elsewhere. But if that should happen, that we can have some planning in advance, and or if folks decide to show up without proper notice, then there can be significant fines up to $750 per passenger per day, as well as impoundment of an intercity bus. There's a lot of legal issues if you want to talk about them, but these regulations, very similar to this, are being put in place. There was a very long list of communities that have enacted these ordinances, and I know that I think Deerfield, Highland Park, and Winnetka are talking about these this week as well.
Winnetka
Same
tomorrow
with
night.
Round Lake.
Yep. Yeah, so happy to answer any questions.
I have a question to Peter, actually, on this subject, and that is, reading the memo, that is extremely interesting. It's basically, it represents our country at this point, community by community. I do not see a consensus. I do not see a clear line. Everybody has the same idea, but yet the implementation differs quite some. Is there a consensus that emerges, or are we having a patchwork?
It's a little bit of a patchwork, but
I was going to say there's two distinctions. One is dealing with regulations for these unchartered or these buses, but the other regulations, some communities have adopted procedures dealing with managing if they have hotels or motels for places, dealing with that element. We don't. So,
Right.
but those are the two big kind of regulatory categories. Sorry, Peter.
that's what I was going to say.
Sorry.
I spoke with Chris Rintz, who's the president of Winnetka, recently today, and he did mention that a very similar policy will be in front of their board tomorrow. He said that they frequently have police presence at the train stations. Is that something that Lake Bluff has as well, in terms of being able to kind of intercept a bus if it arrived?
There has been a few municipalities that have been given heads up from either Metra or other agencies that, hey, there could be a bus coming your way. So if that's, that opportunity is afforded to us, we would sure take advantage of it. We do have cameras at the station as well. But I think there has been somewhat of a heads up. Not always the case, but yeah, sometimes.
As long as you feel we're covered.
To the extent we can, I mean, we can't always station a patrol car, I mean, at that location, but some of these have been coming in the, the wee hours, and so it's a good chance we'll be in the general vicinity, the way we split the coverage in the community.
So I take it that by receiving notice, which is what this provides us, right? 7 days notice of a bus, a one-way bus coming here. By providing notice, that gives us an ample opportunity to make arrangements, to work with the city of Chicago, where the ultimate destination is for many of these folks. That's the nature of what we're trying to accomplish here. Seven days of notice before, so that we can have an orderly transition should this happen.
And it also the rules do call out for them to, whoever's applying to have a drop, that they need to plan for how are these folks that are going to drop be, cared for? What's their plan, in terms of how they're going to deal with it, so they shouldn't just show up haphazardly and leave. There needs to be planning in place. The village is not prepared or set up to manage, migrants or folks showing up without significant planning. We're just not. And even with that, we're going to be coordinating with the county EMA and the state.
Okay, so can we walk through a couple things here? How likely, I know this is like the million-dollar question, but how likely and what is it looking like as far as our 7 days notice actually? Is that realistic? Is that going to happen? And how long are people in transitional holding patterns?
I think most recently, what I'm hearing from other city managers and other police departments is that when buses are showing up at metro stations, that typically what they do is they show up pretty close to when the next inbound train is, and they disembark, they have a handler with them, and they step onto the train or the platform and wait for the train and go downtown, and that's it. There's been some instances where communities have intercepted a bus that has disembarked, and I think they convinced everybody to get back on the bus and escorted them down to their Chicago intake location. So the idea that it's been handled multiple ways, but that's generally what happens, that folks staying over for extended period times seems to be outliers now, from what I understand.
And so that begs a question that is in the option section on that memorandum, that is wait and see or adopt regulations. So given what you said, do we need regulations, or do we need to be firm about what could happen next?
One of the things I've also heard recently is that bus drivers who have had conversations with local law enforcement have said that, they've asked, do you have local regulations? And implying that if you do, then we're going to keep moving.
So that was my next question.
Yeah.
So, what I don't want to see us doing is creating regulations out of anxiety and fear, and regulations that aren't actually going to be practicable or reinforceable. So my question also is, are these bus companies in touch with and communicating with the communities? If we had penalties or fines set up for, non-compliance, do we know who they are? How do we know? How do we track the information? And how realistic is it that we'd be able to enforce our own regulations?
I think to the first question, there is no question that these bus companies have difficulty complying with these types of regulations, not just ours.
Right.
And so they do know, as Drew said, they know who has regulations and who doesn't. And that may be a good thing or a bad thing, but that's, so Chicago has impounded 2 buses. They've fined, I don't know what the number is, many 70 or 80 bus companies or buses for not complying with Chicago's ordinance. So the the bus companies know that that there are these regulations, and patchwork I meant by some municipalities have them and some don't. And it would have been preferable if there had been a regional approach or a statewide approach to this, but that.
Well,
it
how
didn't-
can we, yeah.
Didn't happen, won't happen probably in any reasonable time period. And then there's, town, one of the examples, it's no secret, it was written in the paper, Wilmette has gotten 2 or 3 or 4 over the weekend. They've made a conscious decision not to have regulations.
And
It's
as
a
I
policy decision.
And as I understand, their scenarios had worked like I described. They
Right,
show up,
exactly.
they disembark, it's 5 minutes to the next train, they hop on the train, they're gone.
Interesting.
I think there is still on the table an idea that is, we really want the right thing to occur. And so having people being discharged in front of the green is not the ideal situation. And what I hear is, okay, people are not equipped for our weather, number one. So clothes, food, medical care. I hear that there's a lot of need for medical care. I mean, people are not going to be okay after 50 hours on a bus with no whatever else. And so I would like to stand for doing the right thing. And the right thing means that we might not be without regulation. We might want to funnel people toward the right care. And that means the location we are being informed from Lake County. And so I would stand for forcing the issue, saying, no, you have to do the right thing. That is, this is what happens, this is the process, this is what will happen next for people to be cared in the best possible way. We're not equipped to help people. We have shelters, but shelters will last 2 hours a day, no more than that.
And just one more clarification. The
Yeah.
applicability of this is not only if somebody wanted to drop folks off without notice at the metro station, which has been the case, it would not surprise many that if they started trying to drop elsewhere in the community, like a Target lot, right?
Sure.
So these regulations would apply on private property as well.
Can I
So-
ask another question?
Certainly.
How do we discern what the bus is and who is getting off the bus? Does this open us up for profiling, essentially?
This ordinance does not require any identification of who's on the bus. It's just a numbers game. If the bus includes more than 10 people and it's
There
one
has
way.
to be
But there's-
advance notice, and it has
Correct,
to be
but
clear.
we don't ask for identification. We don't ask anything about who's on the bus.
Okay.
I noticed that several of the examples from the other towns included like an exemption for buses that might be used for sporting events, athletic teams, educational things for the schools. I don't think that was in the draft that we looked at. Is there a reason?
I guess I think we thought it was in there in the sense that it talks about local employers. We know that Abbott
Okay.
and Rosalind Franklin and those buses are, those are round-trip buses, not one-way, right? That's a distinction. And they're regular and that they've been practicing this, and we expect them to do that in the future.
Yeah.
And then the distinction between a one-way trip versus a round trip. So like the sporting events, they're round trips. right?
Okay.
So that's covered.
So we should ask, what is the feeling on the board? Do we need a regulation, or do we need to be going without a regulation as a practice?
I think we should adopt the regulation. I think there's a little bit of a danger to being one of the only municipalities, or being in a position where all of our neighboring municipalities don't have, or do have a regulation, and we don't. And I think we'd be putting ourselves in a bad position to then, after the fact, try to deal with the anticipated and unanticipated consequences of that, when human life is, as you said, we want to make sure people are cared for.
Thank you.
I agree with Trustee Cole.
Thank you.
I think we should adopt one as well. I guess there's nothing, though, that would prevent us from approving a bus to come through, even if it wasn't 7 days' notice. Somebody could call and say, we have a bus coming, is it okay? It's not 7 days, but are you okay with this? We just need to move them to the train. we could approve that, right?
It's not the criteria.
I mean, I think there's some discretion in that, but we obviously want to be careful with that, but yes, there's some discretion with that.
Okay.
I think the concern is no communication.
Right,
Lack of pre-planning.
Right.
exactly.
Would it be the board that goes through the application notices, or would it be the administrative staff?
Administrative.
Okay. Just checking.
Some towns have gone through the manager's office, some have gone through the police department. It's
Here's the key, and this is what I spoke to President Charlo earlier about, is we are tasked with taking care of our people here and acknowledging how hard our community works and our staff works and how the Park District does not have the capacity to long-term provide shelter. The community is small, tiny. It's not ideal. We don't have resources. But at the same time, what I don't want to have happen in these conversations is that we forget that these are human beings in the most precarious positions. When you think about loading yourself and your family on a bus to travel far away from your home and, you know, without knowing your outcome, we know that these are really life and death scenarios that motivate people to leave their home, their country of origin. And so I don't like the idea of us talking about this as if this is, I think it's important that we hold up high what we're doing here, that it's not punitive for migrants, that we care about the migrants and their well-being. And so one thing that I would like to see, and I want to flesh it out, of course, with this board and with President Charlo and Peter, is I think that if any way we can create regulations or rules that actually uplift and give back to the issue, problem solve the issue. So for instance, I would love to see penalties, financial penalties for the bus company or the organization that is non-compliant with our regulation, and that we take those penalties and create a fund or a pool that then feeds back into organizations that in Illinois that are set up to create or support and provide shelter, food, healthcare to migrants.
And complementing that idea, and that goes to Peter for the patchwork word, I was more inclined to ask, okay, if people have regulation, what kind of patchwork do we have in terms of regulation? So that idea you have, that is, what about if we were to unify this regulation or ask this regulation to unify to have the same idea so that we could cooperatively build that capability for shelters?
Right. Because obviously the intent of these fines is to dissuade. At some point, we're going to hit some maximum point where these buses have nowhere to go and the people have nowhere to go. So if at least we are addressing and acknowledging the human crisis that is occurring, and we're doing it thoughtfully and involving ourselves as a community in problem solving rather than, you know, not in my backyarding. That's kind of where I'm hovering right now. I don't know if that makes sense or if there's anything like that in existence yet, but.
The idea is, the not in my backyard is a very valid concern. I think the idea is rather, no, we want to do the right thing. Okay, I told you on the phone today, I came here 27 years ago. I had a plane, I knew where I was going to sleep that night, I knew where am I going to be my next 2 years, and that was in 1990. It was super stressful, but it was organized. It was in effect, way easier than what these people are living every day. And so the idea is we don't want to be punitive. We want the right thing to be done. We want to help. Helping means that we don't want people to literally dump these people on the green. This is not the idea. We want the right thing to be done. And so if in the process we can incentivize bus drivers to do the right thing or punished in order to build something else that will be the right thing at the same time is great.
Some of the examples, ordinances included provisions to allow for criminal prosecution of the bus companies, I guess. Is that something that we considered in drafting this? Is that even something that would work?
I think as a misdemeanor, there's limits to the crimes that the village can create. I think some towns have created misdemeanors. It's just another deterrence as opposed to fines. I think the majority of towns have done fines, if I recall, and rather than the criminal misdemeanor.
To my knowledge, all of them have been focused on the operators, none of them.
Right, yes.
Obviously,
yes.
but regardless, when we legislate, for lack of a better word,
That's what it is.
you know,
That's
when we
what no, you're right.
legislate around topics like this,
Yeah.
we can't ignore who is being affected. The one other concern I have is, you know, community, when there are regulations in place, I don't want a bus carrying a group of people who look like they come from another place to be accosted by community members thinking they're doing the right thing. So, you know, how do we plan on sharing publicly how the community should respond, how Lake Bluff citizens should care or respond, and how do we approach making sure that everyone's protected in those kind of scenarios?
In terms of, should there be a permit issued? Or
Well, more like how are we, I guess I want to make sure that the community is super clear on everybody's role. And when we have a regulation on, written down and enforceable, you know, we have people who care about the community and want to do the right thing, but sometimes might get confused about how to do the right thing. So how do we have, again, it kind of circles back to my concern about profiling, which is maybe there's a bus with some people on it who look like they come from another place who are not migrants. Or maybe this bus is migrants and they did give the 7-day heads up. What I don't want is to create an environment that's rife for, I want our community to continue being what it is, a place that is welcoming and caring and nurturing. And I'm just thinking through how regulations can continue to support that environment.
I think we can do some communication around these regulations,
Yeah.
should they be adopted, and through the website and other communication channels, alerting the community to what's put in place and why. And that's the plan of action, and if you have questions, they can contact. If people have other, goals of contributing or donating, we can find ways to
Yeah,
point people in those directions.
yeah.
As far as your earlier point about, if should the village be in a situation where we have to penalize somebody and their funds, and you would have the flexibility to do what you want with those revenues, should that ever be a situation we encounter.
And I think a statement in that memo was providing the tools to Matt, to our chief of police for doing his work. That doesn't mean that Matt has to use the tools, but at least we have the backing for what could happen, basically. So I think I have nearly consensus on a regulation versus wait and see. I did not hear from you,
Yes. When I'm admittedly scanning other communities, I notice 5 days' notice is the amount of notice that most of them have given. So I wonder if we have a specific reason for 7 days, and mightn't you like 7?
We're small, right? It takes.
We are small.
I think I said 15 or 30 is what I said, just being realistic, right? The more time, the better. But this is like, nah, it's be less. So I think
So-
village attorney swallowed and said 7 would be okay. Yeah.
I mean, there's no magic. Most
Yep,
people
yep.
have done 5. 30 is, you're basically excluding them. 'cause
Yes,
you know.
right. So if we were to get notice as the bus left Texas, it certainly wouldn't take them 7 days to get here.
No.
It would be closer to 5 days. And so my preference is for 5 days. I maybe Taryn agrees, I don't know. My preference is for 5 days, and I like the idea that you've thrown out there that we, by ordinance or elsewhere, say something about what we'll do with these funds. I sincerely hope and believe we won't ever have to recover on these funds. But should we, I would like to be able to send a check to somebody who actually did care for those people in the city or wherever it was that they were getting to.
So are we saying, I do understand that it's a consensus on the regulation in this next for this village? I think I have consensus here on that. What about the content of that regulation? So what are we willing to stand for? We have, reading the memo from Peter, there's everything going. It always is respectful of the people on the bus, but it's always, there's always a negative or positive incentive for the bus operator. And we have variability on the amount. I think you said $750 just one fee for Waukegan, or I've seen $20,000 plus impounding the bus, so everything in between. So what is the taste? What do we want to achieve? It needs to be, and with the compounding with the idea from Trustee Fisher, that is, we would contribute to a thing that would be helping. I don't know how else to say that better.
Peter, do you have any guidance in terms of what is, realistic? I mean, if we're going to do this and the intent is for it to be a deterrent so that folks can end up where they can be better taken care of, then we ought to have some teeth to that
Yep.
deterrence and have some real meaningful fines. Does it jump into Crazyville at some point? I mean, $20,000 in impoundment versus $750?
750 is low.
That is
Yeah.
too
No
low.
question about
No,
it.
it sounds really low.
Most of them say per passenger.
That's what
I
ours
thought.
says. That's what
Okay.
this is for.
Yeah,
we don't
and
have
I,
any
Waukegan.
I'm scanning.
Some have
Libertyville
just,
too.
they don't do it per passenger
Yeah.
because they don't want to get into the passengers.
Yeah, right.
Just the bus company that we care about. And so they've gone, I think, 5 to 10,000. Chicago's, I think, 10,000 or more. So they've just put a flat number on it. Or 5,000, 10,000, giving some discretion.
I would suggest that we be consistent with Chicago at 10,000.
Me too.
I agree with the notion that we don't want to get into passenger lists. I'm just looking at one of the ordinances as summarized, and they had a higher penalty if someone was not in the manifest or whatever.
Correct.
Yeah, we don't
Nope.
want to do that.
Is
Hands
there
off.
a cap on how much, I guess, we can find based on the fact it is an ordinance? It's not.
There's no cap, we're home rule, so there's no cap on it. The constitutional cap is cruel and unusual punishment. 10,000 is not going to go over that
Understood.
theoretical cap.
So I hear being consistent with Chicago, $10,000. What about, do we have somewhat of a consensus on that for consistency?
I agree with 10,000.
I like 10. I only have one question, which is, does it, in the unlikely but really undesirable circumstance that a bus drops people off, either they don't go directly onto the train or they're not even dropped off at the train, do we need to take into account, will there be any expense that the village, I mean, or can we say 10,000 plus any expenses that the village
We capture any-
incurs?
yeah.
Yeah,
Yep.
that would be my,
Cost incurred.
yeah.
That makes sense.
What about, so $10,000, fine. What about the impounding bus part?
I think that's important. I think that'll be a huge deterrent. The impoundment of the bus.
So the only thing about that is if we impound the bus, what,
Let the people go.
yeah, I would love to keep the bus so that the people can stay on it. I don't mean us keep the bus. I'd rather the bus be in use, so if we can have the bus transport them, if that's an option, or they stay on the bus until they get on the train.
So we have some operational protocols set in place where we have relationships we've worked out with local bus companies to be prepared 24/7 to take folks if we need to.
Okay.
And we can recapture those costs and, yeah.
Yep.
So we have possibilities, is that we want to make it, we want to put teeth behind, so this is a fine plus impounding a bus to make a point. Are we going to this extent, or are we staying at $10,000?
I think in
It was
addition was
$10,000
10,000 plus
Plus
cost.
cost.
Plus cost, I'm sorry, yes. Are we,
1,000 plus cost plus impoundment.
Correct.
exactly, so a third item, this is, what is the consensus? Are we feeling,
Sounds like that's a consensus.
it is consensus.
So did we lose track of where that money goes, or the 5 days versus 7 days? Do we have a consensus on those two issues?
I was assuming we had consensus on 5 days.
I like 5 days.
I like 5 days.
And then where the money goes, I'm not sure that has to be in the ordinance. I mean, it's the village's money, the village can set a policy as to
If
what
and
we're
when
gonna
that
do with
shows
that
up,
money.
hey, I can report back.
The village could
Yeah.
announce that so everybody knows that's what's happening.
I think the intent is important. We do not fine only, we fine to achieve another benefit, that is, we build a way forward for people who are in pretty dire circumstances. I think that's the important part.
And the amount that would go would be the fine, not
Yes,
the
Right.
cost.
the cost is so we can
Right, right.
not do the math of,
Yeah, I get it.
you know, what did we need to spend, or are we at a loss that we could have used that fine for? Yeah.
That's,
What we suggest.
we'll bring that tonight.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
You can make some changes on the fly.
Yeah, or they can just be approved,
As
with these
discussed.
changes, because these are minor changes.
Yeah.
So,
For tonight. at the
yeah,
board
for
meeting.
tonight at the board meeting.
Okay. On item 15, we're at 16. Okay.
Yeah.
All right,
I don't know if you
so,
have questions from there.
okay, we can do that too. Absolutely. Do we have any comments from the room? Is there anybody who wants to address our board? Please state your name and your address at the lectern. Thank you.
Peter White, 400 East Sheridan Place. So congratulations to the board and Mr. Friedman for acting very proactively. This is a situation that has developed quickly and is in flux with many communities. I reviewed for the record, I'm not an attorney, Mr. Friedman, but I did review the document, and I have a couple suggestions, maybe for clarity or to beef it up a little. And to somebody, I think was Ms. Fisher's point earlier, with no ordinance, we become a soft target. The reason the bus companies are dropping people in Waukegan and Glenelg is because Chicago put an ordinance in. If we don't, as a village, put an ordinance in, the bus stations or the bus companies are going to find us very quickly. And as my former corporate counsel used to tell me, and Mr. Friedman will probably appreciate this, I'm not here to protect you from today, I'm here to protect you from tomorrow. So putting an ordinance in place is a sound move. On point 3, under 682, 1.3, I would suggest including at the end, it starts with coordination of disembarking passengers. The intercity bus must be met by individuals responsible, blah, blah, blah. To a stop location in the village to their final destinations, I would clarify that to outside, add the verbiage outside the village boundaries. which goes to the point that there's no time horizon in this document. If you go to point G, which is somewhat contradictory to the intent, I believe, it says a detailed written plan providing disembarking passengers for how they will be housed, fed upon disembarking in the village. That implies to me a longer-term relationship. They'll drop them off at Target, and the bus leaves. Are they here for an hour, a day, 6 days? So I would say, I would put a time horizon there saying for a matter of 2 hours or 3 hours. You had a situation in Waukegan, as reported by the news, where the bus was late, missed a train, and you had people there for 5 or 6 hours. I don't think the intent of this ordinance is to have a busload of people at the train station for 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 hours. But I'll leave that to you folks to decide. So yeah, my suggestion is that you sign and amend as appropriate the ordinance. And I also would suggest that all applications for unscheduled stops be posted publicly on a village website, so we can keep track of how many requests that are being made. When you have only one person that has the authority to say, we want 1 or we want 10, the public has a right to know. Thank you. I've probably gone over my 3 minutes, but I hope you'll take my suggestions under advisement.
Thank you, Mr. White.
Good evening, everyone. I'm Jennifer Beeler, and I'm here on behalf of the Lake Bluff Park District Board. I want to thank the trustees very much for problem solving. There's obviously a lot of empathy put behind the thought of what's going on tonight. I'm here because the Park District was contacted in the effort to problem solve with what could be an imminent or what hopefully could be a hypothetical situation. On behalf of the board, I want to say that we're empathetic to any asylum seekers who may be brought into the Chicagoland area. And these are men and women and children who deserve dignity and respect, but they have the more imminent and immediate needs of food, clothing, shelter, and medical care. And as a park district, we regretfully do not have the financial or practical resources for appropriate and moreover temporary shelter for immigrants who may arrive in our community. I had the opportunity to look at the packet and see our neighbors in North Chicago, Waukegan, Highwood, Libertyville are all addressing this. And obviously with the discussion here tonight, there's a lot of thought that's put into an ordinance that's going to come before our community. It's our hope and our faith in the trustees that you'll have something very appropriate in place to protect our community. Not just for something that could be happening, but something unexpected that could be happening. And we hope to work with you as partners in this. And I look forward to the village as well putting forward volunteer opportunities that could be done by individuals or others in the community to help these people who may be coming into our lives. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Mrs. Wheeler. Do we have any more comments in the room? Do we have any comments online?
Anyone wishing to be heard on this topic, please raise your hand through Zoom, and you will be identified and allowed to talk on this topic.
Thank you. So, and I believe that we have a direction for creating a framework. And we have opportunities for maybe volunteer work and other opportunities for our community. So I do appreciate that. Thank you very much. And so I believe that we have a direction as a board. And unless objections, we move on to the next item.
Okay.
Thank you. The next item.
The next item on the committee of the whole agenda is discussion regarding the Lake Bluff Library and requested PPRT funds, and that's personal property replacement tax. So just a quick background, I won't read the entire memo, but it's recently been determined that the Village of Lake Bluff has not provided the Lake Bluff Library its proportionate share of certain taxes collected by the state of Illinois in accordance with Illinois law. As a matter of law, and as shown in the table below, the Lake Bluff Library is owed 4% of the personal property replacement taxes monies received by the village for the past 5 years, which is roughly $22,000 and change, and moving forward. This was shared with the Lake Bluff Board President Bonnie Shaw and Library Director Renee Grassi, who's here tonight. That was done by Village President Charlot, Finance Director Bettina O'Connell, and myself, at a meeting back in late November. And at the same meeting, we talked about that the village would want to memorialize this resolution to this in an intergovernmental agreement. There were some follow-up conversations held, and the library board had a conversation on December 12th. And we received a letter from the library board. It's in the packet. And they are asking for PPRT payments back to 1977 with compounded interest. And they've asked to address the village board on this matter and are here this evening for that purpose. And you all can discuss this, and there's a handful of options to talk about. So.
Correct. I believe we also received, I think the start of that conversation was a little bit nebulous, where we did not know, we knew the last 5 years, but we did not know since 1974, 77.
Right.
We got
Yeah.
more information since then.
At the end of December, we got the actual, most of the data, not all of it, but almost all of it, going back to 1980. That's when the village first received PPRT monies.
Okay.
Can I just ask to clarify, it's PRP money? What's it called?
PPRT.
Yeah, personal property replacement tax. The
Okay.
villages, municipalities used to have the authority to get taxes, collect personal property taxes,
Yeah.
and then the state took on that authority, and then to be made whole, municipalities got money back for that from the state.
Yeah.
So we weren't levying anymore, state was, and here's your share.
Okay. So the PPRT money, the village staff, the village attorney was unaware that this money was owed to the library over a long period of time.
That's correct.
Okay, so now we're aware of it, and the library, which we value greatly in this community and want to be financially viable, is asking for money going back to 1977 and plus compounded interest. I think that's what you said. The statute of limitations on this, I believe I read, was 5 years.
Correct.
So if the village were to go back to 1977, they would be doing so in good faith, not by the letter of the law. Is that accurate?
Correct.
Okay, just wanted to clarify that.
Thank you. I was asked by Mrs. Shaw to also address the board, and I think that would be the right time before we continue with our discussions. Any objections to this request?
Nope.
Thank you. Mrs. Shaw?
Thank you, Regis. In the interest of time, I'm going to skip a few things, so bear with me for a second. So as you heard, the village and the library have agreed that 4% of this tax that's paid by corporations and LLCs is supposed to be distributed to the library. It's because prior to the implementation of this PPRT, the village did receive 4% of this bucket of money. We also agree that these payments should have started as soon as PPRT started, which was actually, now we know, a lot of information came to light kind of Thursday and Friday of last week, that should have started in 1980. We have very different viewpoints on the statute of limitations. We've chosen not to have our attorney here tonight because we feel differences of statute interpretation should be handled directly between the attorneys. But I'm here tonight for two reasons. One, I believe we can amicably work this out. And two, the library pays hourly for our legal services. And I'd like to reduce the amount of taxpayer money that's going to the attorneys. No offense to any of the attorneys in the room. My husband's also an attorney. So That said, I have a small disclaimer, so to speak. My presence here tonight does not mean the library forfeits any of its rights, including rights to the full span of PPRT payments. That's that. Okay, so I'm gonna share with you a little bit of how we got here today, a look at the financial standing of the library, discuss some of the options of how we would use the PPRT money to improve the safety, improve the services, improve the capital investment in the library building. So, as you may have read in the memo that Drew issued on January 5th, the village, at least in part, because of cost efficiencies that our shared tax base expects us to leverage, pays for some of the administrative services of the library on an annual basis. That's happened for a long time. And yes, at various times in the library's history, the library has had to rely on the financial assistance of the village for capital expenses. You know, as a component unit of the village, the library cannot increase tax revenues without explicit approval of the village, and this has not been granted in recent history. So I wanted to piece together the history of the library's finances, and it paints a fairly unusual picture. Okay, so in 1980, what happens is a piece of the tax revenue we were supposed to receive we stopped getting. And at some point in the history of the library, the previous village board tells the library it is not legal for the library to hold its own capital reserve. So no wonder when the roof was falling in, the library didn't have the money to cover it. So we went to the other source of taxpayer revenue. Additionally, for a number of years, there was no increase in the library's budget. And the percentage of the library's budget that was, percentage of taxes that went to the library was so low, the library was disqualified from being eligible for state grants. We left money on the table because the library wasn't getting enough money. Okay, so we need to straighten out the financial relationship between the village and the library. But let's imagine that back in 1980, PPRT was correctly distributed. I don't know about you, but I wholeheartedly believe that the village would still be paying some of the annual administrative costs throughout that time. And the village still would have had to step up to replace the HVAC or replace the roof when the heat stopped working and the roof was leaking and the library had to be closed. So what is the financial position of the library? This is what in Japanese business they call the open the kimono moment, right? So I'll give you a couple key statistics for our library. We serve the same population, right? About 5,500 people. The budget is about $1.1 million today, and our general fund reserve is 40 to 50%. We have no capital reserve, and we have 12.5 FTEs. From a finance perspective, meaning our annual budget and our reserve, our general fund reserve, Highwood is our peer library from a financial perspective. Another comparator, Glencoe. They serve a population slightly larger than ours, 8,200. They have more than twice the budget, 2.5 million, and they have 27 FTEs. So we're operating our budget, we're operating our library on a bit of a shoestring budget. And I want you to remember Highwood as I go through the other 2 points here. Our building. We recently had 2 engineer surveys conducted to our building, one on our systems, the other on accessibility. We have some big ticket items coming in the next few years for the library building. HVAC. We have 50-year-old windows in the building. So we're going to replace the HVAC, but we're still going to lose a lot of energy out of those old windows. We have all incandescent lighting. We have no security system, none. From an accessibility standpoint, not a single bathroom in the building is ADA code compliant. That's just the start of the building. The library staff, the most important resource that we have at the library. Well, our new director, Renee, she's been here for a year and a week, did an analysis of our personnel costs and some marketplace salary benchmarking. Out of 21 individuals who work at the library, 20 of them are paid below the marketplace minimum. Sorry, 20 of them are paid below the marketplace median. 7 out of 20 roles are paid below the marketplace minimum. Lake Bluff should be a plum library assignment for somebody. It should be a great place to work, and people should be rewarded accordingly. With such low salaries, it's no surprise we have had high turnover in our staff. We've calculated that it will cost over $150,000 for us to close this wage gap. And despite being underpaid, our library was just recognized as a star library by a prestigious library journal. So the financial position, the building, the staff salaries, no capital reserve, low general fund reserve, our financial position is partly why we are currently piloting reduced library hours. In 1923, we were open 63 hours a week, open to the public, to anybody who walks off the train, anybody who gets bussed in. We were open 63 hours a week in the fall, winter, and spring. And remember how I said Highwood's our peer library from a financial perspective, $1 million budget? Their $1 million budget, they use it for 36 hours a week. If you don't remember anything about what I've said today, please remember that Lake Bluff is providing Cadillac service to our community with the opening hours of a Target and Hyundai resources. So what would we do with the PPRT? Well, it's certainly not going to solve all of the financial challenges of our library, but it can make an immediate difference in the areas of safety, utility, technology, and financial stability. Security. No security cameras, no armed doors, no badged entry, no paging system. If we needed to lock down the library, we need keys, and it would take a very stressful 15, 20, who knows how many minutes to get that done. A generator for our building would make the library a hub for the community when the power goes out. What did that happen, 45 days ago? Power went out. We have tables, we have chairs, we have Wi-Fi, we have electric plugs. This should be a resource when the power goes out. Technology. The PPRT funds could partially cover the cost of implementing self-checkout. And again, we could create a capital reserve fund. Ultimately, the village board would decide how to use this money. Lake Bluff residents cherish this library. And it's not just the collection of books. It's a sense of community. I know our village faces a variety of financial challenges. Stormwater management, police pension fund. I listened to the October 9th Finance Committee meeting. I envy your general fund balance. But the intention of this PPRT money, since the statute was created for it to be used for the library, toward library services for our community. And the right thing to do is to comply with the state statute, immediately pay the entire amount with compounded interest, make the library whole, help us get on the right track financially.
Do you know what compounded interest, the calculation is for that?
I don't, because the actual numbers for each year of payment was only made available to us, I think, on Friday. The chair of our finance committee has not taken a look at those numbers yet. I'll just tell you a range of numbers that Regis and I had kicked around was, maybe as high as $200,000. I don't know.
At that point, we felt the with a number we got on Friday, so we got $68,000. We thought it was $200,000. So that number is not, it's without talking about simple or compounded interest. That number is what we're looking for.
Yep. Yeah. So I don't know. I don't know.
Thank you, Bonnie.
Look, I think, did Taryn have a question?
I wanted to ask you,
Before you start,
Okay, yeah.
the one thing I want to be extremely clear is I can talk to anybody on this board or anybody in this room. We all care about the library. My kids grew up there. I grew up in a library. God, did I read comics there. And so every Wednesday afternoon. So I have no doubt, we all care about the library. And that has to be extremely clear. I think there are two issues on the table here, okay? And so I don't want these issues to be compounded because it's going to be really hard I'm an engineer. I want to arrive to results. I want to move forward. I want to get things done, okay? We have two issues. We have a PPRT issue, number one, there's a number on the table. And number two, there is a library issue. And there is an issue of finances, of setup, of creation, of day-to-day finances. This is a different issue. We're here to resolve a PPRT issue. And I believe from earlier conversation that our IGA will come on the table very soon, actually. So we can resolve these issues in the near future. Right now is the PPRT, okay?
Yeah, agreed, and I appreciate the opportunity to provide the bigger context, just as when I met and delivered the letter in regard to the library's expectations on PPRT, that you said, talk to me about the bigger picture. What's going
Correct.
on?
And I have to admit that I do discover some of these complications. And so I think we have to work on that. I really stand for a clean relationship, a clean setup. I believe that the last few years have been hard in terms of your funding and in terms of what is expected of a village and what is expected of the library toward the village. I think we need to simplify that. But today is the PPRT. And so we have several options in front of us. And those options would be page one of the memorandum is fitting Peter's a 5-year window, and that would be $22,000. We have a second option that is whatever we know about what was there since 1977, that is about $68,000.
All in, going back to 80, we'd be about 85,000. It's 84,000 and change.
$84,000, my mistake. And we have issues of, we can discuss interest, no interest, compound interest, simple interest, any issue related to what do we stand for as a community. What do you guys think?
I was going to ask President Schall, you mentioned, and I think part of the concern that I've been circling around is a difference of opinion on the statute of limitations. And I have my own opinion about it as well, but I was curious what you meant by that.
So as stated in the letter, the viewpoint is that the statute of limitations does not apply because the library, as a public entity, public board, public funded, is operating in a public interest, not as a private interest. I think there's some case law where it was a private interest that they said 5-year statute of limitation applies. So.
And so where do you stand on that, or what do you think about that?
So.
Or what does the board think about that, the library board, yeah?
Yeah, so the library board feels like, we've been. Renee?
I can't answer that question.
Okay. I mean, I think it's stated in the letter. It's stated in the letter. That was post a full library board open meeting. It's all recorded. You're welcome to watch it. What our viewpoint is in regard to interest and statute of limitations.
Statute of limitations is where I'm at, yeah.
I have another legal question, but I think this one is for
Yeah.
Peter, probably. I've never quite understood the relationship between the village and the library board. There's an elected board in the library, there's an elected board, so that makes me think it's a district. But when I looked at it, I determined that it's not itself a district. It was an entity of the village or something like that. And maybe as our assumptions are right, that nonetheless, we clearly owe this amount of money. It makes me wonder what we were doing in 77 with the money that we were getting in personal property tax. Were we then required to, and or do we continue to be required to pay it over? I think you've concluded that we are, but I've never, it's always seemed a little strange. Our relationship is not crystal clear to me. The taxes come through us, so it's not a separate line item on anybody's tax bill because it comes through us. If it were a district, it would be a separate line item on everybody's tax bill, and there'd be complete transparency how much the library costs. But one of the things that I know with all of the various payments that we've made and in-kind contributions that we've made, there isn't really a clear line item. The public can't know how much the library is costing. So 2 questions wrapped up in that. One, what's the legal entity if not a district? And then, do we know that in 1977, before the PPRT was passed, we were, quote, required to pay the PPRT? Because I think we've already glossed past that and assumed that we're the same, the library is the same as library districts, when in fact it's different.
So the library is not a library district. There are 2 types of libraries: library districts, which are their separate taxing body in and of themselves. They're a separate corporate entity created mostly through referendum to create a library district. Then there's libraries such as the Lake Bluff Library, which is established under the Illinois Local Library Act. The village established the library by ordinance. I don't know when that was. 1924. Under the Local Library Act, which is a separate statute that governs these types of libraries, not library districts.
Okay.
These types of libraries levy taxes through the village. They do not have a separate levy.
Right.
They budget on their own, and then they provide the village with their requested levy, and the village is obligated to extend those levies, or extend those taxes. I believe, my opinion is that prior to the personal property replacement tax, in other words, before the authority of these governments to levy personal property taxes was eliminated by the General Assembly, the village was obligated to share a proportionate share of those things that were levied for that purpose with the library. Whether that happened or not, I have no idea. But I think there was that connection, which is why the statute then says, if I can read it, because I did find it, any municipality or township which receives an allocation based in whole or in part on personal property taxes which it levied pursuant to 3 sections of the Illinois Local Library Act, which is what governs the Lake Bluff Library, and which was previously required to be paid over to a public library, which we were, shall, and then it requires us to pay the personal property
So that's
replacement
upshot
tax.
of my question. We were previously required to.
That's my understanding, correct.
Okay.
Yep.
And
I'd just like to add that the statute also says pay immediately, which is why the village, the library board letter states, pay it immediately and pay us with interest, because we should have gotten those funds a long time ago. If we had, we would have earned interest.
Yeah, but
on
that
them.
ignores
Yeah.
the statute of limitations. That immediately means nothing if there's a statute of limitations.
If,
so we don't know for certain that we were, but we believe that we were required to pay a portion of whatever we had received to this entity that we created in 1924, right? Okay. So assuming that's correct and put that issue to the side, I guess the real question is the statute of limitations. And this, does Ms. Schall have a point that this case that you've cited, the City of Harvey case, had to do with a private interest as opposed to a public interest, or no?
No,
I-
So I do respectfully disagree with the library's attorney on that issue.
Okay.
I can go into it as much or not. I think there is a general rule that for a public body versus a private entity, statute of limitations don't apply. Statute of limitations generally don't apply to a government body because, for example, if a staffer of a public body messes up and does something that causes liability for the municipality or causes them to miss a statute of limitation, courts have said that individual doesn't have the right to negatively impact the public. Right? So we usually don't apply statute of limitations against a government body. But when there are two government entities, then that rule does not apply.
I see.
And there are cases where one public entity has paid taxes incorrectly to another or has not paid taxes to another, not paid annexation fees to another, and the courts have applied the 5-year statute of limitations. There's also the case that I think Drew included in his memo, the pension fund case.
Yeah.
The trial court there specifically said that the 5-year statute of limitations applies.
So it seems to me that we are willing to discontinue all this research that we might do all the way back to 1976 to find out where these buckets of money came in and went out, and instead acknowledge
We owe money.
we owe money. I think that's clear. And we've offered, as I understand it, the full 22,000 going back 5 years. That's right? And that was rejected. That was rejected as inadequate because it did not go back to 1977 or 1980, we now find out. Am I understanding the situation correctly?
Yes.
And they've employed the hourly attorney to advise on that, right?
And we should also, in addition to this thought, we also are, we care about the library, and therefore, yes, we have offered $22,000, but we're also we owe that money. Now, we didn't know that we owed that money, and so in effect, we're willing to do justice to what happened here, but we are also uncomfortable because we didn't know that. And so we are willing to come clean to the table, but to some limits.
So one other thing I want to point out is that dollars are fungible, right? That's the nature of dollars, right? They're fungible. And during the same time that we were purportedly not paying for the last 50 years, something close to 50 years.
Don't say that, because I'm not 50 yet.
Well, okay, I am. So during that self-same time, there were many ways in which we compensated the library in over and above the $2,000 or $100 or $1,000 a month a year that we failed to pay, as I understand it. We weren't labeling it PPRT. We didn't say, please accept this as our PPRT payment, but in fact, the library, in fact, received many in-kind services as well as building maintenance, as well as a loan or a forgiven grant, a grant. So had we had the foresight to, in 1998, label, this $100,000 makes up for our payment going back to 77 that we forgot to pay. Had we had that foresight, then we wouldn't be here today, right? We'd just be talking about the money other than that money. My point is, yes, we owe it. Yes, we're willing to pay it. But it really defies logic as to how we got here with the full story in front of us. So I think our position has been quite clear and quite reasonable.
And I didn't go through, Trustee Ryder's referring to, and I don't know if anybody saw the memorandum, but in the memorandum it lists like, for example, the library, the current library building, the village, there was a $100,000 gift as part of that acquisition of the property, and then the village has continued to pay upkeep on that building as part of an agreement, which I think is expiring, which is expired now, that the village, so, but there's been other $35,000 grant that was not required to be paid back in 2003, 2004. We found out that as recently as, 2004, the village has been paying $16,000 and $21,000, so add that up over, $40,000, almost $40,000 over the years for FICA and IMRF pay. So we've been really,
Sorry, is that per year?
yeah. So, we've been, and then.
We should have
paying-
labeled it PPRT payment.
Right. So, well, that's when Renee first brought this up, we looked at that, it's like, gosh, this seems surprising, given how close we've had this very close relationship over the years, and so much money has changed hands over the years, that it was like,
Changed hands.
from the village to the library, yes. But, so the idea is, like, it was really surprising to find out that that was not there, and we were like, we hope we had uncovered enough going back to 1977, there was not some resolution, we checked all the minutes, the resolution, the ordinances, to see where there was just some acknowledgement that we're not going to do this, but we're going to do these things, because it just seemed like there was so much financial support.
So I might be taking a very different position here,
That's fine.
okay? The library is a major asset. We love the library. We've said it over and over again. What President Shull just was sharing about the unusual nature of not being able to have their own, the library can't maintain its own capital. I need to know more about that. I definitely want to know more about that. What I don't want is extended discomfort and tension, and sometimes, I am a lawyer, I do a lot of negotiating. Sometimes you really can't resolve, and you need to go year by year and do the compound interest, and maybe even have a judge weigh in. Why don't we just pay from 1980? I just pay from 1980. Let's help the library. We want to see the library succeed. We probably, if this wasn't on the table and the library came to us and said,
That's just
we need help, we need a roof, we need an HVAC, can the village help us? We'd probably be helping the library.
Exactly.
So however we categorize it, why don't we just pay it? Now, the interest piece makes me feel a little tight, because I do want to say this out loud. I read the letter when we received it, and I was in court, and I walked out of court and called Drew, because I was like, what is this? This is very confusing. And I think the letter says that the library and the board and its leadership is not accusing the village of any malfeasance. The letter felt like it was a little bit,
Yeah,
okay? And I think what we've all acknowledged here is the library and the village did not know, because if the library knew or the village knew, we would be paying. So I'd like us to get back to some level of, nobody's the bad guy here. And that's why I have kind of questions about, well, how do we really address whether or not a statute of limitations has told, meaning has there been a reason for, or non-reason for one of these entities to have known, because it kind of works, it's kind of asking the village to say, you should have known, but we shouldn't have known. So my suggestion is, we pay the $85,000 immediately, we help the library make a dent in its financial strain, we make it so that we can all continue enjoying the library. If I was negotiating and your lawyer isn't here, and we will leave it to the lawyer, but informally, I would suggest we dump the idea of interest, because interest tends to be punitive, and the village nor the library should be penalized right now. That's what I'd say. Let's stop talking about whether or not what the village does in the past. We need to be future-focused at a different date to address this other issue, which is, let's financially remove ourselves as much as we can, so the library and the village have very clear boundaries as far as how we operate, and, yeah.
Thank you, Trustee Fisher. Any feedback to Terrence's multiple points?
I'm comfortable with that. I am, but I do feel very strongly that we need to have some better line of sight into the actual costs of running the library. Had it been a district, it would have been a separate line item on everybody's tax bill. It's not. And if someone were to come to the village and say, how much does the library cost every year? We could say, well, this is what we levy for them, but we'd have to go line by line to try to figure out what other in-kind money that we provide. So let's make that clear. We owe it to our taxpayers to make that clear, because one of the things that we need to understand is we're on a Hyundai budget and we expect a Cadillac, and that happens over and over and over again in this community. And without line of sight into the actual costs, it will continue to happen over and over again. So I'm happy to do the actual line item number, which we understand to be about 65,000 more.
My mistake.
84,473.
84.
473 goes back
Over
to
and, but that's not over and above the 22
That's in addition to.
in addition, oh,
Total. That's
Total.
total, not in addition to the 22, which we.
Correct.
No, that's the total.
Yeah, in part because we have historically and we will continue to support the library. It matters to us. But I think at the same time it matters to us, it also matters to us to make clear to the public the value of the entity they have. And that we may have to reduce hours. They may have to reduce hours because there isn't another alternative. We can't have the Cadillac.
So what I hear is four things until now. That is, we do justice to the library, let's say $85,000. I don't remember the number. We owe transparency for what the library is getting. I also hear we need to clarify and clean our relationship, financial relationship with the library. What did I miss?
Well, one thing we all missed is we need, if we were to proceed, I would want to see, and I think the board would agree, and I know Peter would agree, is we would need an intergovernmental agreement
Okay.
to memorialize this discussion.
Yes, this
So
is the
that
clean
would have
part.
to be part of this discussion.
That's the clean part. We need to
Yeah.
exit better out of this situation, okay? We need to be clear about, I really didn't know what you said about you were limited to make your own choices. So what is it going to take? We need to do better for that. I think that I was always told that the relationship with the library and the village was a little bit complex. I didn't know how complex it was, so we need to do better for that.
I'm still
okay?
learning.
So if we can resolve stormwater, we should resolve government and library issues. What else? Is that a consensus on the board? Is that something we want to achieve?
Is there time to just kind of also
We
share
will make-
thoughts?
We will make the time.
Okay. I think there's a difference between what we may or may not be legally obligated to provide and what we want to do because it's the right thing for a core asset in our community.
Right.
And going back and taking the full, back to 77 or 80, whatever it is, it feels like the right thing to do, not necessarily because the money's owed, but because the library needs it. I mean, the conversation about all of how antiquated our library is relative to what it needs. The fact is the library needs an infusion. We've talked about the infusion going forward, right? There have been things that we've paid for in the past that we will or will not pay for in the future. So the library needs to fly on its own. It feels a little funny to me. I mean, I can understand the PPRT that there's an opportunity for $85,000 plus, somewhere between $70,000 and $200,000 of interest, and the library needs that. But in the relationship we have where the village, have provided so much support for the library, it's a little bit of a hard pill to swallow to say, hey, we're hiring a lawyer and you got to give us money. It's kind of like looking a gift horse in the mouth. So for me, I fully support taking care of the library the way the library needs to be taken care of to be a core asset in our community, but doing so in a responsible way. And if going back past what we're required to do of 5 years to pay $85,000 is a way to give them capital, then let's do it, and but the library's gonna have to be happy with that, right? What I don't wanna do is agree to do that and have the librarian come back and say, well, you village board are stiffing us, and we're upset. So I would support what trustee Fisher has said, but only if the library's in support of that.
Yeah.
I agree with trustee Rappin.
I agree as well.
I believe we have a direction.
To ensure absolute clarity, I request it in writing so I can bring it back to my board, and we will get back to you. As you know,
Awesome.
the power is in the board.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And that does conclude this committee of the whole.
Almost a half hour late.
Could I please have a motion to adjourn?
Motion to adjourn.
Second.
Thank you. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed? Thank you.
Need a second.
And it is right now 7:21. Let's get back together at 7:25 or 7:30? 7:25.
Am I right? So I'm changing this, I changed this.